Greetings, class. In this installment, we're going to address the question, what is negative peace? And I'm going to say that this could be the shortest section. Uh, it's really pretty straightforward to say that lots of people define peace as being kind of the negation or absence of physical violence. I think this is the intuitive thing that most people put in their answers. Um, Certainly in the conflict and peace narratives that have been presented, we see some exceptions to this where people think of peace in very kind of visceral terms, where it's the stillness, it's that kind of being able to be comfortable and feel safe and secure in your place. Um, Lots of people make connect their feelings of peace to their kind of spiritual practices. They feel peaceful while they're communicating or praying with God, or while they meditate and they let their minds still. Um, but when we first verbalize peace, right, we think in a very real kind of disappointing way about our language, that we have a continua, that there's war on one end and there is peace on the other, and that when we think about the movement between war and peace, it ends up just being a reflection of the increase in violence. And so we've already talked about this definition of positive peace as being the social conditions being present so that they can prevent violence. So if we think about the positive peace as being this extreme, having truth and justice and equality and equity of resources, that not only do we see an absence of physical violence, but we see that where there are disputes, we have mechanisms in place to manage those disputes such that violence would be avoided. If we put that at the extreme, and then we put our physical violence, our war on the other end, then we might put negative peace in the middle, right? That's the kind of breaking point where our feelings of there's more peace when there's less violence and there's less peace when there's more violence might happen somewhere in the center there. So, the absence of direct violence, the absence of physical violence, this is negative peace, right? We're not punching each other in the face, so we're at peace. But that doesn't mean that my feelings about you are positive. That doesn't mean that I don't want to hit you, right? It just means I'm not actively engaged in that struggle. It's helpful to have this term, right? The US is frequently thought of in these kind of terms, right? We're a country at peace at the times when we are not at war, right? It's a kind of political statement, and it begs certain questions. If we analyze the United States of America as being a peaceful nation, how then do we explain the rate of gun violence in this country? If we're a peaceful nation, how do we describe what's happening, say, in Chicago on almost any given weekend when there are 5, 10, 15 gun fatalities, homicides that take place in that single city every single weekend? Right? This happens at the political level because we say that war is defined by the presence or the experience of 1,000 or more battle fatalities in a year. Right? The conflict is escalating when it's somewhere between 0 and 1,000 fatalities. But we would say that a country was at war when there was battle deaths. Well, the U.S. has more than 1,000 homicides committed per year in some cities, let alone almost every state. But we don't consider those to be battle deaths, right? It's violence, but it's not war. The US is at peace, but violence is taking place, right? We have a negative peace. If you are in proximity of violence, that has a psychological and sociological impact on you as an individual and on the community that you live in. People spend significant amounts of money in this country on things and steps that they take to feel safety, but not steps like feeling safe in a car by putting on a seatbelt, but the steps that they take to prevent themselves from being victimized by crime, or out of the fear that somebody might be armed and prepared to do them injury, potentially death, right? In robbery, right? Take their stuff. We do not have the positive peace conditions of feeling safe and secure in the United States, right? We do not have the presence of social conditions which prevent violence. This is not like a slight on law enforcement. Law enforcement is not in place to interrupt escalations in violence. Law enforcement is in place to respond to criminal activity, right? To get to the problem once it has gotten to a certain escalation. Sometimes people might call, I hear shouting, I'm worried. Okay, there might be some sorts of exception to this rule. And part of the slogan is protect and serve. And again, I think that there are many police officers who provide fantastic service to their communities. But I'm talking about the institutional and structural mechanisms that are in place. The state does not take it upon itself to act in such a way and to create institutions in such a way that we address conflicts prior to escalation, and that we don't have things put in place to try to guarantee equitable distribution of resources. In a prior clip, and I thought about this, was this too depressing to say to students? But it's real. There is a freeze happening across this country. And on Valentine's Day, today is Valentine's Day, a day to celebrate love. There will be people freezing to death in this country. Not for lack of shelter, but for lack of access to the existing shelters. We are choosing a distribution of resources. And some might say this is what's fair, and some people want to punish the homeless for the bad choices that they made, and others might be ignorant over just how close a person could be to being homeless, how quickly you can go from being fully employed to evicted. But this is our system. It's a system of violence. Letting people freeze to death is violence, right? That's real, tangible human suffering. Letting somebody freeze to death, dropping a bomb on them, these are corrosive elements. They damage the human psyche, right? It's hard, right? I said, I felt like, was that too much to say, right? I'm being completely honest with students, but sometimes my honesty might get people into places where they're like, wow, that's really depressing. When I tell stories about people I know who had family members that they never got to meet, possibly because they died of treatable medical conditions, that they were not given the access to their treatment because of discriminatory practices like the friend whose ancestor died while being transported from a whites-only hospital to a blacks-only hospital, or servicing blacks hospital. I don't know if it would have been only for black people. I don't know if a white person would say, I don't want to be treated there or not. I don't know how bad things would have to be in order for people to cross certain lines. But what I do know is I watched him present, and I watched him ask how many people have had appendicitis and how many people have known someone who died of it. Treatable. Routine procedure. It happens. If you don't treat appendicitis, it's really dangerous. Fatal. I mean, I've heard some of those stories. People who die on their way to the hospital. But that's the only time I've ever heard about dying while being transported from a hospital to another one because you can't get treated there based upon skin color. So, positive peace, having systems in place to prevent violence. Negative peace is just the absence of violence. It has nothing to do with the potential for future violence or the capacity to prevent the escalation to violence, just the absence in the moment. Hopefully, that's not too depressing, but hopefully it also helps to make clear that part of what we talk about in this class ends up being the piece of just operations and equitable solutions and equality. But part of the narrative discourse in this country is not in line with the deeper meanings of being peaceful, but being wrapped up and committed to the presence or absence of violence. Knowing which is being talked about and knowing what difference that makes on the narrative and the discussion is really crucial to some of the other insights that we'll go over. See you in the next one.